This is a quiet exploration of how human beings learn to draw the world around them. It is a story that unfolds slowly across thousands of years. It begins not with ink or parchment, but with memory, with footsteps, and with the patient observation of land and sky. Over time, these observations were shaped into lines, symbols, and measured distances. The process was gradual. It required curiosity, repetition, and careful thought. Maps did not appear fully formed. They grew piece by piece as people learned how to describe space. Long before writing systems developed, early humans carried mental maps. These were internal understandings of rivers, hills, hunting grounds, and seasonal paths. Knowledge of terrain meant survival. A valley that held water during dry months or a pass through mountains that remained open in winter could sustain a community. This information was shared through speech and gesture. Paths were remembered through stories. Landmarks were named and revisited. The earliest physical maps that survive today are simple by modern standards. One of the oldest known examples is a wall painting discovered at Çatalhöyük in present-day Turkey, dated to around 6,200 BCE. The painting appears to show a clustered settlement beneath a twin-peaked mountain. Scholars still discuss whether it is truly a map, yet it reflects an early attempt to represent physical space from an elevated perspective. It suggests that even in early agricultural societies, people were beginning to imagine their surroundings in abstract form. Clay tablets from ancient Mesopotamia provide clearer evidence. In the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, scribes pressed markings into wet clay. Some tablets from around 2300 BC show fields, irrigation canals, and property boundaries. These were practical documents. They recorded ownership and agricultural planning. The land was measured using ropes and simple units. Straight lines on clay represented canals. Small shapes indicated plots of land. Accuracy mattered, though the methods were modest. The Babylonian map of the world, created around the 6th century BCE, offers another step in cartographic history. It shows the city of Babylon at the center, surrounded by a circular ocean. Beyond that ocean lie distant regions, some described in mythological terms. The map blends observation and cosmology. It reflects how geography and belief were intertwined. The world was not yet measured precisely, but it was arranged in a meaningful structure. In ancient Egypt, mapping served administrative and engineering purposes. The Nile River flooded each year, reshaping fields and altering boundaries. Surveyors known as rope stretchers measured land after floods receded. They restored property lines with care. Tomb paintings show these activities in detail. Papyrus documents also reveal plans of mines and quarries. These maps were practical tools, drawn to support construction and taxation. Across the Mediterranean, Greek thinkers began to approach geography with systematic reasoning. In the 6th century BCE, Anaximander of Miletus is said to have created one of the first Greek world maps. Though the original does not survive, later descriptions suggest it depicted the known world as a disk surrounded by ocean. The effort marked a shift. Geography became a subject of philosophical inquiry. By the 3rd century BCE, Eratosthenes of Cyrene made careful measurements of the earth itself. He observed the angle of sunlight in two cities at the same moment and calculated the planet's circumference with notable accuracy. His work demonstrated that the Earth was spherical. This insight transformed map-making. A flat disk could no longer represent the whole truth. Cartographers needed new methods to project a curved surface onto flat materials. Claudius Ptolemy, working in the 2nd century CE in Roman Egypt, compiled knowledge from earlier geographers into a text known as the Geographia. In it, he described a coordinate system using latitude and longitude. He explained methods for projecting the globe onto a flat surface. Though many of his location measurements were imperfect, his mathematical framework endured. For centuries, his approach guided map makers in Europe and the Islamic world. While Mediterranean civilizations refined geographic theory, other cultures were also developing mapping traditions. In ancient China, maps were drawn on silk and wood as early as the 4th century BCCE. These maps showed rivers, roads, and administrative regions. Chinese cartographers used grid systems to maintain proportion. During the Han Dynasty, mapping became an official state activity. Accurate maps were essential for governance, military planning, and taxation. Pei Shu, a Chinese scholar of the 3rd century CE, outlined principles for cartography that included scale, orientation, and standardized symbols. His guidelines emphasized precision. They encouraged measurement rather than approximation. These principles anticipated later developments in other parts of the world. In South Asia, cartographic traditions were often embedded in cosmological diagrams. Some maps depicted sacred geographies rather than physical measurements. They illustrated pilgrimage routes and mythic landscapes. These representations served spiritual and cultural purposes. They conveyed meaning through symbolic arrangement rather than geometric accuracy. The Islamic Golden Age, beginning in the 8th century CE, fostered new advancements in geography. Scholars translated Greek texts, including Ptolemy's work, into Arabic. They corrected and expanded upon earlier measurements. Al-Khwarizmi revised geographic coordinates. Al-Idrisi, working in the 12th century at the court of Roger II in Sicily, compiled a detailed world map based on traveler accounts and merchant reports. His Tabula Rogeriana depicted Africa, Europe, and Asia with remarkable clarity for its time. It integrated knowledge from multiple regions, reflecting the interconnected trade networks of the period. In medieval Europe, many maps served religious instruction rather than navigation. The mappa mundi tradition arranged the world in symbolic form. Jerusalem often appeared at the center. Continents were shaped to fit theological narratives. These maps were not intended for travel. They illustrated a worldview shaped by scripture and tradition. At the same time, practical navigation maps were emerging along Mediterranean coasts. Portolan charts, developed in the 13th century, showed detailed shorelines and compass directions. They were drawn on parchment and marked with rhumb lines radiating from compass roses. Sailors relied on them for maritime trade. The accuracy of coastlines improved through repeated voyages. Knowledge accumulated gradually. The invention of the magnetic compass, likely originating in China and later adopted in Europe, enhanced navigation. Mariners could determine direction even without visible landmarks. This allowed maps to extend beyond familiar coastlines. Sea routes became more reliable. Cartography responded to these needs with clearer depictions of harbors and currents. By the late 15th century, European exploration expanded geographic understanding dramatically. Voyages across the Atlantic and around Africa introduced new continents to European maps. Cartographers integrated reports from explorers into updated world maps. The printing press, invented in the mid-15th century, allowed maps to be reproduced in larger quantities. Geographic knowledge could circulate more widely. Martin Waldseemüller's 1507 world map included the name America for the first time, honoring the explorer Amerigo Vespucci. This naming reflected the merging of exploration and publication. Printed maps standardized certain shapes and labels, though revisions continued as new information arrived. Gerardus Mercator, a 16th century Flemish cartographer, introduced a projection that preserved compass bearings as straight lines. The Mercator projection became valuable for sea navigation. It distorted the size of land masses near the poles, yet it allowed sailors to plot consistent courses. The mathematical reasoning behind such projections illustrates the balance between geometry and practicality in map design. As centuries progressed, surveying techniques improved. Triangulation methods measured distances between distant points using angles. Instruments such as the theodolite enhanced precision. National mapping projects began to chart entire territories systematically. In France and Britain, detailed topographic maps were produced through coordinated surveys. These efforts required years of fieldwork. Maps evolved from symbolic sketches into scientific documents. They recorded elevation, political boundaries, infrastructure, and natural resources. By the 18th and 19th centuries, cartography had become both an art and a science. Engravers etched fine lines onto copper plates. Shading suggested mountains. Color distinguished regions. Throughout this long development, maps remained reflections of their makers' knowledge and assumptions. They displayed both discovery and limitation. Each generation adjusted inherited maps to match new measurements. As the modern era approached, global exploration had connected continents through trade and communication. The Earth was increasingly understood as a single, measurable sphere. Mapping moved toward standardization, supported by international agreements on longitude and timekeeping. The groundwork had been laid for further transformation, as technology would soon reshape the practice once again. As the 18th century drew to a close, mapping had become a coordinated national effort in several parts of the world. Governments recognized that accurate geographic knowledge supported administration, taxation, defense, and infrastructure. Surveying moved from scattered local projects to systematic programs. In Britain, the Ordnance Survey began in the late 18th century. Its early purpose was military planning, especially in response to concerns about invasion. Surveyors traveled across fields and hills with chains, compasses, and theodolites. They established triangulation networks, measuring angles between distant points such as church towers and hilltops. From these angles, they calculated distances with careful mathematics. Over time, the survey expanded to cover the entire country. Detailed topographic sheets were printed, showing contours, roads, rivers, and settlements. Similar projects developed in France, Spain, and other European nations. Large-scale triangulation networks stretched across landscapes. Teams worked slowly, often for decades. They placed markers on mountaintops. They recorded positions relative to known baselines. Precision improved with better instruments and refined calculations. Cartography became closely linked with geodesy, the science of measuring the Earth's shape. During this period, it became clear that the Earth is not a perfect sphere. It is slightly flattened at the poles and bulging at the equator. Surveyors accounted for this shape when calculating long distances. National surveys adopted reference ellipsoids to model the planet's curvature. These mathematical surfaces allowed coordinates to be expressed consistently across large areas. At sea, navigation also became more exact. The development of the marine chronometer in the 18th century allowed sailors to determine longitude reliably. By comparing local noon with the time at a known reference meridian, navigators could calculate their east-west position. This solved a long-standing problem. Accurate longitude transformed maritime charts. Positions of islands and coastlines could be corrected. Global trade routes became more dependable. By the 19th century, printed atlases were widely available. Advances in engraving and lithography made map production more efficient. Schools used maps to teach geography. Explorers returned from Africa, the Arctic, and the interior of Australia with new data. Cartographers integrated these reports gradually. Blank areas on world maps became smaller. In the United States Geological Survey was established in 1879. It conducted systematic mapping of terrain, mineral resources, and water systems. Topographic quadrangle maps displayed elevation through contour lines. Each line represented a constant height above sea level. When viewed together, the lines described the shape of hills and valleys. This method allowed readers to visualize relief without shading alone. Railways, canals, and telegraph lines spread across continents during the 19th century. Maps recorded these networks. Transportation maps simplified geography to highlight connections. They used straight lines and standardized symbols. Accuracy of relative position remained important, yet clarity of routes sometimes took precedence over strict scale. In the early 20th century, aerial photography introduced a new perspective. Cameras mounted on balloons and airplanes captured images from above. During the First World War, aerial reconnaissance demonstrated the military value of this technique. After the war, civilian mapping agencies adopted aerial surveys. Photographs were analyzed using stereoscopic methods, which allowed surveyors to perceive depth by comparing overlapping images. Elevation could be measured without walking every slope. This marked a quiet shift. Instead of relying solely on ground-based triangulation, cartographers could extract information from images taken high in the air. Large regions were mapped more quickly. Forests, deserts, and mountain ranges became easier to document. In the mid-20th century, satellites extended this view even further. The launch of artificial satellites in the late 1950s opened new possibilities. Earth-observing satellites began to capture systematic images of the planet's surface. Programs such as Landsat, initiated in 1972 by the United States, provided repeated global coverage. Images were recorded in multiple wavelengths, including those beyond visible light. Scientists used these data to map vegetation, water bodies, and urban growth. At the same time, computers began to change how maps were produced and stored. Geographic information systems, commonly known as GIS, emerged in the 1960s and 1970s. These systems allowed spatial data to be stored in digital layers. One layer might represent roads, another might show elevation, another could display population density. Each layer could be analyzed separately or combined with others. The computer became a tool not just for drawing maps, but for exploring relationships within data. Digital cartography reduced dependence on manual engraving. Lines were drawn on screens rather than etched into metal plates. Corrections could be made without recreating entire sheets. Data could be updated continuously. Maps became dynamic rather than static. Global positioning technology added another development. The Global Positioning System, or GPS, was developed by the United States Department of Defense and became fully operational in the 1990s. It relies on a constellation of satellites orbiting the Earth. Each satellite transmits signals containing its position and the precise time. A GPS receiver on the ground calculates its own position by measuring the time delay from multiple satellites. By solving a set of equations, it determines latitude, longitude, and altitude. Civilian access to GPS signals allowed ordinary individuals to know their location with increasing accuracy. Handheld receivers became available. Surveyors, hikers, and drivers used them. Over time, smartphones integrated GPS chips as standard components. Location became a background feature of daily life. Digital maps moved onto the internet in the late 20th and early 20th century. 21st centuries. Online mapping platforms allowed users to view streets, satellite imagery, and terrain from personal computers. Companies such as Google, through Google Maps, and organizations such as OpenStreetMap provided interactive maps that could be zoomed and panned smoothly. These systems rely on large databases of geographic information stored on remote servers. Route planning for cars developed alongside these digital platforms. Algorithms calculate optimal paths based on distance, speed limits, and traffic conditions. Real-time data from other vehicles and road sensors can update travel times. The map displayed on a dashboard screen adjusts continuously as a car moves. The user does not need to understand projection systems or triangulation networks. The complexity remains behind the interface. Despite this convenience, the underlying principles remain connected to earlier centuries. Coordinates are still expressed in latitude and longitude. Projections are still chosen to balance distortion and clarity. Survey control points continue to anchor digital data to physical locations. The foundations laid by earlier geographers persist within modern software. Printed maps have not disappeared. They remain in atlases, in classrooms, and in field kits. Paper does not require electricity or signal reception. It offers a broad view at once without scrolling. Some people continue to prefer its tactile presence. Cartographers still design printed maps with attention to typography, color harmony, and symbol clarity. Meanwhile, satellite navigation systems for vehicles combine GPS receivers with digital map databases stored locally or accessed through mobile networks. When a destination is entered, the device calculates a path and provides spoken instructions. These instructions are based on geographic coordinates and road attributes stored in structured datasets. Traffic updates adjust routes in response to congestion. The scale of mapping has also changed. High-resolution satellite imagery can reveal features less than a meter wide. LiDAR technology, which uses laser pulses from aircraft to measure surface elevation, creates detailed three-dimensional models of landscapes. Urban planners use these models to analyze drainage and building heights. Archaeologists use them to detect subtle patterns hidden beneath vegetation. At the same time, individuals contribute to mapping projects. OpenStreetMap, founded in 2004, allows volunteers to add roads, paths, and landmarks using GPS traces and local knowledge. This collaborative approach resembles, in some ways, the shared memory of early communities. Knowledge of place is recorded collectively, though now in digital form. Global reference systems have become standardized through international cooperation. The World Geodetic System 1984, often abbreviated as WGS 84, serves as a common framework for GPS coordinates. Timekeeping standards, such as Coordinated Universal Time, ensure that satellite signals remain synchronized. These conventions allow devices worldwide to interpret position consistently. Mapping now extends beyond the Earth's surface. Planetary scientists create maps of the Moon, Mars, and other celestial bodies using spacecraft imagery. Projections adapted for spherical objects are applied to these distant terrains. The principles remain familiar, though the subjects differ. In daily life, maps are often encountered quietly. A phone screen displays a blue dot representing current position. A delivery service tracks a vehicle across a simplified street network. Weather maps show patterns of temperature and precipitation. Each of these displays rests on centuries of accumulated methods. The evolution from clay tablets to digital tiles did not occur abruptly. It unfolded through incremental refinement. Ropes measured fields. Angles defined triangles. Ink traced coastlines. Photographs captured patterns from above. Signals from orbiting satellites defined points on the ground. Each step built upon previous understanding. Maps have always balanced abstraction and reality. They simplify the world to make it usable. A map cannot show every stone or tree. It selects features according to purpose. A nautical chart emphasizes depth and hazards. A subway diagram focuses on sequence of stations rather than exact distance. The choice of what to include reflects the needs of its time. Today, cartography is both specialized and ordinary. Professionals analyze spatial data for climate research, epidemiology, and urban design. At the same time, individuals check directions while walking through unfamiliar streets. The act of locating oneself within space has become almost effortless. Yet the quiet structure beneath this ease remains complex. It involves satellite constellations, ground control stations, mathematical models of the Earth, and vast data centers. These systems operate continuously. Most users do not see them. The interface presents only a smooth surface. As the present day settles into routine, maps continue to change gently. Data are updated, roads are added, Boundaries shift, software versions improve. None of this happens all at once. It proceeds through steady revision. If one looks back across the long arc of history, the progression appears patient. Early humans remembered the curve of a river. Ancient surveyors stretched ropes across flooded fields. Greek scholars calculated the Earth's size with shadows and distance. Medieval navigators traced coastlines with careful attention. National surveys measured hills with triangles. Aircraft photographed valleys. Satellites transmitted time signals through space. Digital systems layered information into quiet grids. Each development reduced uncertainty a little further. Each method refined the description of place. The intention remained consistent, to understand where things are and how they relate to one another. Now, in the early decades of the 21st century, the map is often a living screen. It shifts as vehicles move. It recalculates as traffic slows. It stores histories of journeys taken. At the same time, printed sheets rest folded in drawers, their lines steady and unchanging. The story does not conclude with a final invention. Mapping continues as long as people move across land and sea. The tools may become smaller, the calculations faster, yet the underlying impulse remains calm and steady. The light of this history softens when viewed from a distance. Thousands of years compress into a gradual widening of knowledge. From memory to measurement, from measurement to mathematics, from mathematics to digital networks, the change has been continuous. The Earth itself has not altered its shape in response. Mountains rise slowly. Rivers adjust their courses over centuries. Coastlines shift with tides and erosion. Maps follow these changes with measured patience. And so the record of place continues, quietly, expanding line by line, coordinate by coordinate, in a rhythm that mirrors the steady turning of the planet beneath the sky. In recent decades, mapping has become more closely woven into daily routines. Many people carry devices that determine position within seconds. A signal leaves a satellite, travels through space, and reaches a receiver held in a hand or mounted in a vehicle. The calculation happens quietly. Latitude and longitude appear as numbers. A small symbol marks a location on a digital display. Behind this simplicity lies a layered structure. Satellites orbit at precise altitudes. Their clocks are adjusted to account for both special and general relativity, because time moves slightly differently in orbit than it does on the ground. Ground stations monitor their paths. Corrections are transmitted when necessary. The user sees none of this. The result is a stable coordinate system that spans the globe. Digital maps are built from vast collections of data. Roads are recorded as vector lines. Buildings are represented as polygons. Rivers are traced as connected segments. Elevation is stored in grids of numbers, each cell describing a small patch of terrain. These datasets are stored in servers distributed across continents. When a map is opened on a phone, only the needed portion is sent to the device. As the view shifts, new sections are requested and displayed. This method is often described as a system of tiles. The Earth's surface is divided into squares at multiple scales. At a distant view, a single tile may represent hundreds of kilometers. When zooming in, each tile is replaced by smaller tiles with greater detail. The process feels continuous. In reality, it is a sequence of small replacements. Traffic information adds another layer. Many navigation applications collect anonymous speed data from moving vehicles. If cars slow along a stretch of road, the system detects a pattern. Travel times are adjusted. Alternative routes are suggested. These calculations are based on statistical models. They compare present conditions with typical patterns from previous days and weeks. The map on the screen is no longer static. It responds to change. Yet the underlying representation remains structured. Coordinates define position. Databases define attributes. Algorithms determine relationships. In parallel, mapping supports scientific observation. Climate researchers analyze satellite imagery to measure changes in ice cover, forest extent, and ocean temperature. Public health specialists map the spread of diseases to understand geographic patterns. Urban planners examine population density and land use to guide development. Each application relies on accurate spatial data. Remote sensing technologies continue to improve. Satellites now capture imagery at resolutions measured in tens of centimeters. LiDAR surveys produce detailed elevation models that reveal subtle variations in ground surface. These models help estimate flood risk and plan infrastructure. Radar instruments measure ground deformation to monitor earthquakes and volcanic activity. The map becomes a tool for observing processes, not only locations. At the same time, ethical questions accompany these capabilities. Detailed mapping of neighborhoods can improve services. It can also raise concerns about privacy. Location data, if misused, can reveal patterns of movement. Governments and companies establish policies to regulate access and retention of such information. The conversation unfolds gradually, shaped by law and public expectation. In education, digital globes replace some traditional atlases. Students rotate a three-dimensional model of the Earth with a fingertip. They can tilt the view to examine mountain ranges or follow river systems from source to mouth. Historical imagery allows comparison between past and present landscapes. This continuity between earlier cartographic traditions and modern interfaces is subtle but clear. Open data initiatives have made many geographic datasets publicly available. Government agencies release topographic maps, satellite imagery, and boundary files for public use. Researchers and developers build applications upon these resources. The barrier to creating custom maps has lowered. Software libraries allow individuals to design interactive maps with relative ease. Despite these advances, the principles of projection remain relevant. Any flat representation of the Earth must distort some aspect of reality. Modern web maps commonly use a variation of the Mercator projection for its simplicity in tiling and navigation. This projection preserves angles, but enlarges areas near the poles. Greenland appears larger than it is relative to equatorial regions. Cartographers are aware of these distortions. Alternative projections are used when area comparison is important. Time has become another dimension in mapping. Animated maps display change across years or seasons. A slider moves, and the map updates to show shifting boundaries or expanding cities. The representation remains two-dimensional on the screen, yet it conveys temporal movement. The data beneath are structured in sequences, each tied to a specific date. Indoor mapping has also developed. Large buildings such as airports and hospitals create detailed floor plans integrated into navigation systems. Signals from Wi-Fi networks and Bluetooth beacons assist with positioning inside structures where satellite signals are weak. The map extends into enclosed spaces. Autonomous vehicles rely on highly detailed maps known as high-definition maps. These include precise lane markings, curb positions, and traffic signal locations. Sensors on the vehicle compare real-time observations with stored maps to determine position within centimeters. The map becomes part of a control system, guiding movement through complex environments. In rural and remote regions, mapping continues to address gaps. Humanitarian organizations use satellite imagery to identify roads and settlements after natural disasters. Volunteers trace features from imagery to create up-to-date maps for relief efforts. This process blends global technology with local response. Cartography remains a discipline with its own standards. Professional cartographers consider color schemes that are accessible to individuals with color vision differences. They choose typefaces that remain legible at small sizes. They balance density of information with clarity. Even in digital environments, design decisions shape understanding. Printed cartography persists in specialized forms. Nautical charts are updated regularly by hydrographic offices. Pilots use aeronautical charts showing airways and navigation aids. Hikers carry topographic maps in waterproof cases. In these contexts, reliability and readability are valued above novelty. The evolution of mapping has not erased earlier forms. Instead, new methods have layered over old foundations. A coordinate recorded on a smartphone still corresponds to a meridian and parallel defined centuries ago. A contour line on a digital elevation model reflects a concept developed in the 19th century. The continuity is steady. As the present moment continues, mapping integrates with other technologies. Augmented reality overlays directional arrows onto live camera views. A person walking through a city may see guidance superimposed on the street ahead. The underlying data remain coordinates and vectors. The display method changes. Global navigation satellite systems now include not only the United States' GPS, but also Russia's GLONASS, the European Union's Galileo, and China's Beidou. Receivers often use signals from multiple systems simultaneously. This increases accuracy and resilience. The cooperation and coexistence of these systems reflect an interconnected world. Even with advanced tools, uncertainty has not vanished. Signals can be blocked by tall buildings or dense forests. Maps can contain outdated information. Data require maintenance. Teams of analysts review imagery and reports to correct errors. The process is ongoing. In some ways, mapping has returned to a familiar pattern. Early communities shared local knowledge of terrain. Today, digital platforms allow individuals to add reviews, photographs, and corrections to maps. The scale is global, yet the act resembles earlier contributions of lived experience. The Earth continues to change slowly. Glaciers retreat in some regions. Coastlines adjust with sea level variations. Cities expand outward. Agricultural fields shift patterns. Satellite observations record these changes over time. Updated maps reflect them. The rhythm is gradual. There is a quiet symmetry in this long history. From clay tablets to cloud servers, from rope measurements to atomic clocks in orbit, each stage has sought to describe position with greater consistency. The tools have grown more complex. The intention has remained measured. In a room lit by a soft screen, a person traces a route across a digital map. The image responds with smooth movement. Underneath, coordinates are calculated, tiles are loaded, and algorithms evaluate paths. The experience feels simple. It rests on centuries of accumulated thought. When the device is set aside, the world remains in place. Rivers follow their courses. Mountains hold their contours. The map, whether printed on paper or rendered in pixels, is an interpretation of this steady landscape. As night approaches, the glow of the screen dims. The grid of streets fades into darkness. The satellites continue their silent orbits. Signals travel outward and return. Calculations persist, even when no one is looking. The story of maps does not end with a final chapter. It settles into continuity. Each new survey refines a boundary. Each updated data set adjusts a line. The process is calm, methodical, and ongoing. From remembered paths in ancient valleys to digital navigation guiding quiet evening drives, the history of mapping forms a long, unbroken line. It stretches across millennia with steady purpose. And as the planet turns beneath the constellations, the work of describing its surface continues in gentle increments, measured in coordinates and careful lines, gradually blending into the quiet background of everyday life. As mapping continues into the present, much of its work happens quietly in the background of other systems. Logistics networks depend on precise geographic databases. Packages move through warehouses and across highways, guided by coordinates stored in routing software. Each delivery address is translated into a point on a map. Vehicles follow paths calculated through layers of road data. The map, in this sense, supports movement without drawing attention to itself. Agriculture has also become closely linked with spatial information. Farmers use satellite positioning to guide tractors along straight and on evenly spaced lines. This method is often called precision agriculture. GPS receivers mounted on machinery allow seeds and fertilizers to be applied with measured accuracy. Fields are mapped into grids. Soil conditions and crop yields are recorded for each section. The information is reviewed season by season. Adjustments are made gradually. In environmental management, geographic data support conservation efforts. Wetlands are delineated through a combination of field surveys and remote sensing. Protected areas are defined with boundary coordinates. Wildlife corridors are identified by analyzing terrain and vegetation patterns. These maps are updated as landscapes change. They assist decision-making without altering the land itself. Ocean mapping continues as well. Large portions of the sea floor were unknown in detail until recent decades. Sonar systems mounted on ships emit sound waves that reflect from the seabed. By measuring the time it takes for echoes to return, scientists calculate depth. Multi-beam sonar sweeps wide areas, producing detailed bathymetric maps. Autonomous underwater vehicles extend this capability. The process is slow and methodical. Each survey adds small increments to a global chart. Air traffic management depends on carefully maintained aeronautical maps. These charts display airways, waypoints, restricted zones, and navigation aids. Pilots and controllers use standardized symbols and coordinate systems. Updates are issued regularly. Even as cockpit displays become more digital, the structure of the information remains grounded in earlier cartographic principles. In urban areas, three-dimensional city models are increasingly common. Buildings are represented not only as footprints, but as volumetric forms. Height data are derived from LiDAR surveys or architectural records. These models assist in planning, shadow analysis, and infrastructure design. They can be viewed on screens or in virtual environments. The representation of space grows more layered, yet it remains based on measured coordinates. Mapping also supports emergency response. When natural disasters occur, satellite imagery is analyzed to assess damage. Flood extents are traced. Landslides are identified. Updated maps guide relief efforts. The speed of data processing has improved, but the method remains consistent. Observations are converted into geographic layers. Decisions follow from that information. Cadastral maps, which record property boundaries, continue to play a fundamental role in legal systems. Parcels are described by metes and bounds, or by reference to coordinate grids. Ownership records are linked to mapped shapes. Disputes are resolved by referring to surveys and documented measurements. The clarity of these maps contributes to social stability in many regions. The integration of mapping with time-sensitive data has grown more refined. Weather maps update hourly or even more frequently. Radar systems track precipitation. Satellite sensors monitor cloud formation. Forecast models combine these inputs to predict movement of storm systems. The map becomes a dynamic canvas for atmospheric processes. In transportation planning, spatial analysis evaluates traffic flow patterns over months and years. Heat maps display areas of high congestion. Planners examine these patterns to adjust road design or public transit routes. The map serves as a tool for understanding behavior at scale. As data collection expands, standards remain important. Organizations such as the International Organization for Standardization define formats for geographic data exchange. Metadata accompany data sets, describing accuracy, projection, and date of collection. This documentation ensures that information can be interpreted correctly by others. Without such structure, maps would lose reliability. There are also regions where mapping remains incomplete. Dense forests, conflict zones, and rapidly changing urban fringes may lack up-to-date surveys. In these places, satellite imagery and community contributions gradually fill gaps. The process is incremental. No single effort completes the picture. The relationship between mapping and storytelling has evolved gently. Interactive story maps combine text, images, and geographic context. A reader scrolls through a narrative while the map shifts to relevant locations. This form merges cartography with communication. It reflects a long tradition of using maps to explain journeys and events. Educational tools now allow students to create their own maps from open datasets. They select variables, choose color scales, and interpret patterns. Through this practice, they learn that maps are not neutral. Each design choice shapes perception. Scale, classification, and symbol selection influence how information is understood. Even with advanced visualization, the fundamental challenge of representing a curved Earth on a flat surface persists. Projections are selected according to purpose. Equal area projections preserve relative size. Conformal projections preserve local angles. Compromise projections balance distortions without eliminating them. The choice is deliberate, not incidental. In remote sensing, spectral analysis identifies materials based on reflected wavelengths. Vegetation indices reveal plant health. Thermal imagery indicates surface temperature. These data are mapped as raster layers, where each pixel holds a value. Analysts interpret patterns over time. The method is systematic and careful. Geospatial science has become an interdisciplinary field. It draws from mathematics, computer science, geography, physics, and design. Universities offer degrees in geographic information science. Students learn about coordinate systems, database management, and spatial statistics. The knowledge accumulated over centuries is organized into curricula. At the same time, many people interact with maps casually. A person searches for a nearby cafe. The application displays a cluster of icons. Reviews and opening hours appear. The map supports small decisions throughout the day. Its presence is constant yet understated. As digital infrastructure grows, resilience becomes a consideration. Backup systems ensure that satellite navigation continues if one signal weakens. Data centers replicate geographic databases across locations. Regular updates correct errors. The system functions through redundancy and maintenance. There are efforts to map intangible aspects of space as well. Noise levels in cities are recorded and visualized. Air quality sensors contribute data to urban maps. Social researchers map patterns of access to healthcare or education. These layers represent conditions rather than physical objects. They extend cartography into new domains. The physical craft of map-making has changed, but certain elements endure. Clear typography remains essential. Balanced composition aids readability. Legends explain symbols. Scale bars provide context. North arrows indicate orientation. These conventions connect present-day maps to their predecessors. As the pace of innovation steadies, changes become more subtle. Software updates refine interfaces. Satellite constellations expand gradually. Data resolution improves by small increments. There is no single moment that marks completion. The development is continuous. In quiet offices and laboratories, analysts review data sets. They correct misaligned boundaries. They validate coordinate transformations. They document methodologies. This careful work ensures that maps remain trustworthy. It is detailed and patient. Beyond Earth, mapping of other planetary bodies continues at measured intervals. Orbiters around Mars capture high-resolution imagery. Elevation models are derived from laser altimeters. These maps support scientific understanding of planetary geology. They extend cartographic principles beyond our own world. Returning to everyday life, the presence of mapping often fades into habit. Directions are followed without reflection on how they were calculated. Locations are shared through simple messages. The complexity remains beneath the surface. The Earth itself continues its slow rotation. Continents drift at imperceptible speeds. tectonic plates shift by centimeters each year. Survey systems account for these movements by updating reference frames periodically. Coordinates are adjusted to maintain consistency over time. Even the ground beneath a city is not entirely fixed. In this ongoing process, the history of mapping feels less like a sequence of inventions and more like a gradual clarification. Early sketches captured general form. Later surveys refined detail. Digital systems enhanced accessibility. Each stage contributed to a clearer representation of place. There is a quiet satisfaction in tracing this progression. It does not rely on spectacle. It rests on careful measurement and thoughtful abstraction. The map remains a tool for orientation, planning, and understanding. As evening settles, the steady glow of screens softens. Printed maps rest folded on shelves. Satellites continue their orbits, transmitting signals at regular intervals. Servers process requests and send tiles across networks. Survey markers stand on hillsides, unnoticed by most who pass. The practice of mapping persists in this calm continuity. Lines are drawn, coordinates are recorded, data are revised. The world is described again and again, with small improvements each time. From the first remembered path across a valley to the quiet recalculation of a digital route, the story forms a long arc of observation and representation. It moves without haste. And as the day comes to a close, the map remains what it has always been. A measured reflection of the land and sea, resting gently within human understanding, steady as the turning earth beneath a quiet sky. As the present era continues, mapping becomes less visible, yet more pervasive. Many systems rely on geographic coordinates without displaying a traditional map at all. Ride-sharing services match drivers and passengers through spatial queries. Delivery platforms calculate estimated arrival times using road networks and traffic models. Utility companies map underground pipes and cables to maintain infrastructure. In each case, location is a foundational variable. The storage of geographic data has shifted toward distributed computing. Large data sets are divided across many servers. When a user requests a map view, multiple machines respond in coordination. This structure allows millions of people to access mapping services at the same time. The complexity is managed through software architecture rather than manual drafting. Accuracy continues to improve through incremental refinements. Differential GPS techniques use ground-based reference stations to correct small errors in satellite signals. Real-time kinematic positioning allows measurements with centimeter-level precision under suitable conditions. Surveyors use these methods for construction, land division, and engineering projects. The results are integrated into broader geographic databases. At the same time, mapping remains dependent on human judgment. Automated systems can detect roads from satellite imagery, yet manual verification is often required. Cartographers review anomalies. They confirm that a newly detected line is indeed a road and not a shadow or a dry riverbed. The collaboration between automation and oversight ensures reliability. In coastal regions, tidal models are incorporated into nautical charts. Sea levels rise and fall daily. Charts must account for these variations to indicate safe navigation depths. hydrographic offices update soundings based on surveys and sediment movement. Mariners consult these charts with quiet attention. Mapping also supports resource management. Forest inventories use spatial sampling to estimate timber volume. Water. Authorities map watersheds to monitor supply and quality. Energy networks are represented through grids of transmission lines and substations. Each layer adds to a composite understanding of land use and infrastructure. The representation of boundaries remains a sensitive matter. Political borders are depicted according to international agreements and, at times, ongoing disputes. Map publishers choose how to display contested areas based on legal frameworks and market considerations. The map, in this respect, reflects both geography and governance. In the digital environment, personalization shapes map display. A user's previous searches may influence suggested locations. Frequently visited places appear prominently. This adaptation is subtle. It tailors the map to individual habits without altering the underlying coordinate system. Geographic data standards continue to evolve. The Open Geospatial Consortium develops specifications that allow different systems to share spatial information. File formats such as GeoJSON and shapefiles encode geometry and attributes in structured ways. These conventions facilitate interoperability. They allow datasets created in one context to be used in another. The use of drones has expanded mapping capabilities at local scales. Small unmanned aerial vehicles capture high-resolution images of construction sites, agricultural fields, and disaster areas. Photogrammetry software stitches these images together to create orthomosaics and three-dimensional models. The process is methodical. It combines overlapping photographs to calculate depth through parallax. In mountainous regions, satellite radar interferometry measures ground movement with millimeter sensitivity. By comparing radar signals over time, scientists detect subtle shifts in terrain. These measurements inform hazard assessments. The data are represented as color-coded displacement maps. They reveal motion that would otherwise go unnoticed. Indoor positioning. Technologies continue to develop gradually. Signals from Wi-Fi access points, Bluetooth transmitters, and inertial sensors in smartphones are combined to estimate location inside buildings. Accuracy varies, yet improvements are steady. Large facilities integrate indoor maps with outdoor navigation to create seamless guidance. Even in the realm of art and culture, mapping finds quiet expression. Artists create thematic maps that reinterpret familiar spaces. They might map sounds of a city or emotional responses to neighborhoods. These works extend cartography into reflective domains while still relying on spatial reference. In academic research, spatial statistics examine patterns such as clustering and dispersion. Analysts test whether observed distributions differ from random expectation. Geographic regression models explore relationships between location and social or environmental variables. The map becomes a framework for quantitative inquiry. Throughout these developments, the essential act remains translation. The physical world, with its continuous surfaces and shifting conditions, is converted into discrete representations. Points, lines, and polygons stand in for mountains, roads, and lakes. Raster grids approximate gradients of elevation or temperature. The translation is careful. It acknowledges limits while striving for clarity. Time passes, and updates accumulate. A new bridge is constructed, a road is rerouted, a building is demolished. Survey teams record changes. Satellite imagery confirms them. Databases are amended. The map remains current through steady revision. In remote areas, mapping sometimes reveals previously undocumented settlements or pathways. High-resolution imagery may show clusters of rooftops or faint tracks across arid land. Analysts verify these findings. Coordinates are assigned. The additions are modest, yet they expand the recorded landscape. The education of future cartographers emphasizes both tradition and innovation. Students learn classical projection theory alongside modern programming languages. They study historical atlases to understand design lineage. They also build interactive web maps. The discipline adapts without discarding its roots. As technology advances, the physical artifacts of earlier eras gain historical value. Antique maps are preserved in archives and museums. Conservators stabilize fragile paper and faded ink. Scholars examine marginal notes and printing techniques. These documents reveal how past generations understood their world. In contrast, digital maps leave fewer tangible traces. Versions are overwritten. Interfaces change without leaving physical residue. Archiving digital cartography requires deliberate effort. Institutions store datasets and software to preserve access for future study. The task is ongoing. In everyday settings, mapping blends into routine. A fitness application traces a running route through city streets. A weather alert displays a shaded polygon, indicating rainfall. A social media post includes a location tag. These interactions occur quietly, without ceremony. The continued refinement of global navigation satellite systems enhances resilience. Signals from multiple constellations reduce the likelihood of disruption. Augmentation systems improve accuracy for aviation and maritime use. The infrastructure operates steadily, maintained by engineers and technicians. Even as devices grow smaller, the scale of mapping remains planetary. Data centers house racks of servers storing terabytes of spatial information. Undersea cables transmit data between continents. Ground stations track satellite orbits. The physical network supporting digital maps spans the globe. The human experience of place, however, retains its immediacy. A person stands at a crossroads and consults a map for orientation. The representation assists, but the surroundings are felt directly. Buildings cast shadows. Air carries familiar scents. The map complements perception rather than replacing it. As the narrative of mapping extends into the present day, its tempo slows. The broad transitions have already occurred. What remains are refinements. Higher resolution, faster processing, more seamless integration. The map, whether etched in clay, printed on paper, or rendered on glass, remains a quiet companion to movement. It records position. It suggests direction. It organizes space into understandable form. Beyond the devices and databases, the Earth continues its steady cycles. Seasons turn, rivers rise and fall, coastlines adjust gradually, survey markers endure weather and time. Satellites trace predictable paths overhead. The history of mapping, when viewed as a whole, feels like a long and careful conversation between humans and their surroundings. Each generation adds a small clarification. Each tool refines the dialogue. Now, in the calm of the current moment, the glow of digital maps softens into background light. Coordinates are calculated without notice. Routes are traced and then forgotten. Updates occur overnight. And in this quiet continuity, mapping persists as it always has, a measured reflection of land, water, and sky, unfolding gently alongside the turning of the world. In the present day, much of the structure of mapping is embedded within systems that operate continuously and quietly. Large global data sets are synchronized across institutions. National mapping agencies update base layers of roads, hydrography, and elevation. Private companies refine address databases and points of interest. The updates are incremental. They often pass unnoticed. Cloud computing supports this steady revision. Geographic data are stored in distributed clusters. When corrections are made, they propagate through versions. Application interfaces draw from these updated sources. The map that appears on a screen today may differ slightly from the one displayed a week earlier. A new roundabout might be visible. A recently constructed building might appear in satellite imagery. The integration of satellite imagery with machine learning has streamlined certain tasks. Algorithms are trained to recognize features such as roads, rooftops, and agricultural fields. They scan imagery pixel by pixel. Patterns are identified based on prior examples. The results are reviewed by human analysts. This partnership reduces manual effort while maintaining oversight. Elevation models continue to improve in resolution and coverage. The Shuttle Radar Topography mission in 2000 provided near-global elevation data at moderate resolution. Later missions refined these data sets. National LiDAR programs have produced detailed terrain models for many countries. These models assist in flood modeling, infrastructure planning, and ecological research. They represent surface variation in grids measured in meters or even centimeters. Marine mapping advances at a measured pace. Autonomous surface vessels survey coastal waters. Satellite altimetry estimates broad seafloor features by measuring subtle variations in sea surface height caused by underwater topography. Each dataset fills small gaps in global bathymetric charts. The oceans remain vast, yet the mapped area increases gradually. In polar regions, mapping supports climate observation. Satellite imagery tracks sea ice extent and thickness. Researchers compare seasonal averages over decades. Glacial movement is measured through repeated imaging and radar analysis. These observations are expressed through maps that show change over time. The representations are precise and methodical. Address systems have also evolved. In some regions without formal street names, digital platforms have introduced grid-based location identifiers. These systems divide the Earth into small squares and assign unique codes. They provide reference points where traditional addresses are absent. The concept is simple. It relies on dividing space into consistent segments. Three-dimensional mapping is now common in urban modeling. Data from LiDAR and photogrammetry are combined to create digital twins of cities. These models replicate buildings, roads, and terrain in detailed form. Planners simulate infrastructure projects within these environments. The map becomes a planning tool as well as a descriptive one. Geographic data are increasingly linked with sensors embedded in everyday objects. Traffic lights transmit status information. Weather stations report local conditions. Environmental sensors measure air quality at street level. These streams of data are georeferenced. They appear as points or shaded regions on analytical maps. The process is continuous. In academic research, spatial modeling helps understand migration patterns, economic activity, and biodiversity distribution. Researchers test hypotheses by overlaying data sets. Correlations are examined with statistical care. The map serves as a visual interface to complex analysis. Despite these advancements, the importance of scale remains constant. A global map emphasizes continents and oceans. A city map focuses on blocks and intersections. A building plan shows rooms and corridors. Each level of detail serves a different purpose. Transitioning between scales requires thoughtful generalization. Small features are simplified at broader views. This practice preserves clarity. The practice of cartographic generalization has been refined through software. Algorithms reduce line complexity while retaining essential shape. They remove minor bends from a river when viewed from afar. They cluster dense points of interest to avoid overlap. These adjustments are subtle. They ensure that the map remains readable. Time-aware mapping continues to expand. Historical map archives are digitized and georeferenced. Researchers align old maps with modern coordinate systems. This alignment allows comparison of past and present landscapes. Urban growth, shoreline shifts, and land use changes become visible across centuries. In transportation, real-time public transit maps display moving buses and trains. GPS units installed in vehicles transmit positions at regular intervals. The data are integrated into routing systems. Commuters view arrival times that adjust minute by minute. The map reflects motion in near real time. Emergency services rely on precise geolocation for dispatch. When a call is placed from a mobile device, approximate coordinates can be transmitted to responders. Mapping software identifies the nearest available unit. Routes are calculated with consideration for traffic. The response depends on accurate spatial data. The maintenance of coordinate reference frames continues in the background. Tectonic plate motion causes continents to drift slowly. Geodetic agencies update reference frames periodically to account for this movement. Stations anchored to bedrock record shifts of millimeters per year. Adjustments ensure that coordinates remain consistent over time. The representation of the Earth's shape has also been refined. Satellite missions measure variations in gravitational field strength. These data inform models of the geoid, an equipotential surface approximating mean sea level. Understanding the geoid improves elevation measurement accuracy. The refinement is technical, yet it contributes to the stability of mapping systems. Cartographic design adapts gently to changing display technologies. High-resolution screens allow finer line weights and subtle color gradients. Dark mode interfaces reduce glare in low-light conditions. Accessibility guidelines encourage sufficient contrast and legible fonts. These adjustments enhance usability without altering core principles. In humanitarian mapping, rapid response teams use satellite imagery to trace roads and buildings after earthquakes or floods. Volunteer communities assist by digitizing features from imagery. The combined effort produces updated maps that support aid, distribution. The workflow is organized and methodical. Geospatial education increasingly emphasizes data ethics. Students consider privacy implications of location tracking. They examine biases in data collection. They learn that maps can influence perception and policy. This awareness shapes responsible practice. The integration of augmented reality continues to evolve quietly. Head-up displays in vehicles project navigation cues onto windshields. Smartphones overlay directional arrows onto camera views. The user experiences guidance integrated with physical surroundings. The underlying map remains coordinate-based and structured. In rural communities, mapping supports infrastructure development. Utility companies map electrical grids and water lines. Broadband expansion relies on detailed coverage maps. These representations inform investment decisions and public policy. Even in space exploration, mapping maintains its steady rhythm. High-resolution images of the Moon and Mars are mosaicked into global base maps. Rovers use these maps for navigation. Scientists annotate geological features. The practice mirrors terrestrial cartography, adapted for new terrains. As systems grow more interconnected, data security becomes a routine concern. Access controls protect sensitive spatial information. Encryption safeguards transmission. Regular audits maintain integrity. These processes operate quietly behind interfaces. Throughout all of this, the map retains its dual character. It is both a technical construct and a familiar image. It is built from coordinates and algorithms. It is also recognized as a depiction of place. In a quiet office late in the evening, a server processes map tile requests. In a moving car, a navigation system recalculates a route due to minor congestion. In a research lab, a scientist overlays climate data on a global grid. These actions occur independently, yet they share common foundations. The pace of change feels measured now. Innovations appear as refinements rather than transformations. Data become more precise. Interfaces become more intuitive. The essential structure remains steady. If one steps back and considers the long span of mapping history, the present moment fits into a pattern of gradual elaboration. Memory became drawing. Drawing became measurement. Measurement became mathematics. Mathematics became digital computation. The Earth continues its slow rotation. Satellites circle in predictable paths. Signals travel outward and return. Databases update. Screens illuminate briefly and then darken. And in this quiet continuity, mapping endures as a patient practice of describing space, line by line, coordinate by coordinate, settling gently into the background of modern life, as steady and unobtrusive as the turning of the planet beneath the night sky. As mapping settles fully into the fabric of the modern world, its presence becomes almost transparent. Many devices rely on location awareness without presenting a visible chart. A weather application determines local forecasts from coordinates. A camera stores geographic tags within image metadata. A banking system checks transaction locations for security verification. Each function draws quietly from spatial reference systems, refined over centuries. The structure beneath these conveniences remains orderly. At the foundation are coordinate reference systems. They define how positions are expressed numerically. Transformations convert coordinates between systems when needed. Datums anchor these systems to mathematical models of the Earth. The details are technical, yet stable. Global navigation satellite systems operate continuously. Ground control stations monitor orbital paths and adjust clocks. Receivers calculate positions by comparing signal arrival times. Small errors caused by atmospheric delay are corrected through models. These corrections are incremental. Accuracy improves step by step. Mapping also supports scientific monitoring of long-term change. Sea level rise is measured through satellite altimeters that detect minute differences in ocean surface height. The data are mapped and averaged over time. Deforestation is tracked through classification of satellite imagery. Urban expansion is quantified through land cover analysis. Each data set adds a measured observation. The discipline of cartography continues to emphasize clarity. Even in digital displays, visual hierarchy guides attention. Major roads are drawn with thicker lines. Minor features recede into lighter tones. Labels are placed to avoid overlap. These conventions, developed through print traditions, adapt to screens without losing their intent. In transportation systems, mapping is integrated with timing and control. Rail networks rely on precise geospatial data for signaling and scheduling. Air traffic control uses geographic coordinates to manage flight paths and separation distances. Maritime navigation systems combine GPS with radar and electronic charts. The integration is systematic. Surveying itself has become more efficient through satellite-based positioning. Continuously operating reference stations provide correction signals to field equipment. Surveyors can establish control points quickly. Data are uploaded to central repositories. The workflow is streamlined, yet the principles remain those of measurement and verification. Mapping standards are reviewed and updated through professional organizations. Committees evaluate best practices for data accuracy, metadata documentation, and interoperability. Revisions are discussed, tested, and adopted gradually. The process ensures consistency across institutions. In cultural heritage preservation, mapping records archaeological sites and historical landscapes. Geographic information systems document excavation layers and artifact locations. This spatial context aids interpretation. The data are archived for future study. The role of mapping in environmental stewardship continues quietly. Protected marine areas are delineated through coordinates. Migration corridors are identified through GPS tracking of animals. Watershed boundaries guide water management policies. The map serves as a reference for balance between development and conservation. As autonomous systems expand, mapping supports machine perception. Self-driving vehicles compare sensor data with stored maps to confirm lane positions and traffic controls. The stored maps are updated when road configurations change. The relationship between digital representation and physical environment becomes tighter. The representation of uncertainty is also considered. Some maps include confidence intervals or data quality indicators. For example, Hazard maps may show zones with varying levels of risk. The visual language communicates probability rather than certainty. This refinement reflects a mature understanding of data limitations. Digital archives preserve historical maps in high resolution. Scholars access these archives remotely. They examine changes in coastline outlines or urban grids over centuries. Georeferencing techniques align historical maps with modern coordinates. This alignment reveals both continuity and transformation. The computational aspect of mapping continues to advance at a steady pace. Spatial databases handle large volumes of data efficiently. Query languages retrieve features within defined areas. Spatial indexing accelerates searches. These technical improvements remain mostly unseen by everyday users. Mapping education incorporates programming skills alongside classical design. Students learn to manipulate data sets through code. They automate repetitive tasks. They also study typography and color theory. The blend of art and science persists. In some regions, mapping initiatives focus on inclusivity. Efforts are made to represent indigenous place names accurately. Community consultations inform boundary delineations. The map becomes a space for recognition and respect. Global collaboration remains central. International agreements define maritime boundaries and airspace corridors. Geodetic networks share data across borders. Scientific missions distribute satellite observations openly. The coordination is ongoing. As digital displays become more common in vehicles and public spaces, cartographic interfaces adapt to varied lighting conditions and viewing distances. Designers adjust contrast and symbol size. They test readability under motion. These refinements are subtle. The accumulation of spatial data continues at a measured rate. New imagery is captured. Field surveys record changes. Updates are integrated. The cycle repeats. In quiet residential neighborhoods, mapping is encountered in small ways. A person checks the distance to a nearby park. A delivery driver confirms a house number. A cyclist follows a highlighted path along a river. The interactions are brief. Over time, mapping has shifted from a rare, scholarly pursuit to an everyday utility. Yet the core remains steady. It is a disciplined attempt to describe location and relation. The long chain of development from etched clay to digital pixels now feels complete in its broad outline. Further advances will likely refine detail rather than redefine method. Precision may increase. Interfaces may simplify further. The foundational concepts are established. The Earth rotates at its constant pace. Night and day alternate. Without regard to maps, satellite constellations maintain their orbits. Data packets travel along fiber optic cables beneath oceans. Servers process coordinates in distant facilities. In homes and offices, screens illuminate briefly as routes are checked or places searched. Then they dim again. Printed maps rest folded, edges worn from use. The history of mapping, traced across millennia, resolves into a quiet continuity. It began with memory of paths and landmarks. It moved through measurement and mathematics. It expanded through print and photography. It settled into digital systems that operate quietly. Now, in the present moment, mapping persists not as spectacle, but as infrastructure. It supports movement and understanding without demanding attention. And as the evening grows still, the lines of the map soften into the background, steady and patient, mirroring the calm turning of the world beneath a quiet sky.